The VZ55 used to be one of the best heavy tanks at tier 10 in World of Tanks, and the line was also very nice. However, since the nerfs to the VZ55 and the line in general, it's got to the stage where the tank is fine to play, but is it worth the grind? In this video, that is why I aim to help you work out. Starting out with the tier 1, the Kolu Hausenka, and yeah, I mean it's tier 1, it's a bus. Moving up to the tier 2, and again, there's nothing really exceptional about this tank. It's just your bog standard tier 2, and you'll probably go through it very fast, or not even play it at all. You may start at tier 3 or 4. Speaking of the tier 3, at least this has some form of character to it, that you can get an autoloader, which is a tier 4 gun, which means that you do get 115 pen on the premium round as well. Apart from that, it's your standard derpy gun. I mean, 0.38 actually isn't too bad for tier 3, but yeah, it's your standard kind of, you know, low tier gun. Not really much of an armor upgrade or anything like that. You're much the same. As you can see, this has 25mm of armor for the hull, and then 15 around the sides and rear, and then the turret for the upgraded one, 50 armor at the front, whereas if you were using the tier 2, yeah, it literally has nothing. So a little bit of an armor upgrade, but honestly not a lot. I mean, considering that you have exactly the same hull armor, in fact you get 1mm worse hull armor on the sides and rear compared to the tier 2, you're going to get penned by everything. Then moving up to tier 4, and it's then kind of back to being just generic and a bit boring, because you don't even have the autoloader gun anymore on any of these, so you don't really even have that to make it a little bit more fun. I mean, yes, you do get an armor upgrade. You now have 60 armor at the front for the turret. However, you are now at tier 4, and a lot of tanks are going to start to have a lot more pen for the standard rounds, including yourself, which has 86. So you're not really going to be bouncing anything either in this tank. It is tier 4, it's a medium tank, it's going to be useful for digging out the damage and moving around the map. So honestly, the entire tier 1 to 4 is just boring, to be honest. I mean, maybe the tier 3 might be funny with the autoloader, but it's very boring. Moving up to tier 5, and obviously from tier 5 onwards I will rate them, but also it's very important from tier 5 onwards, it needs to be decent enough. Because if the mid tiers are boring or kind of useless, a lot of players will just don't bother with it, because why would they? You know, once you get to tier 5, you're starting to see the progression in the actual classes and the development of the classes and how they go into each role. So for example, at tier 5, most light tanks are now actual light tanks, rather than everything kind of being a light tank at tier 1 to 4. And then medium tanks have their separate roles where they can be aggressive and they could have a little bit of armor, or they could have autoloaders and stuff like that, where you start to see those roles develop. So tier 5, I feel, is very important to understand where the line is going. And unfortunately, because of the way that the VZ55 line is, you're playing mostly medium tanks until you get to, I think it's tier 7. Yes, but until you get to tier 7. So the tier 5 will teach you medium tanks, the tier 6 will teach you medium tanks, and then you need to then learn heavy tanks at tier 7, which it can be frustrating for some people. Overall, this tank at tier 5, the Skoda T24, is not an awful vehicle, but it's not an insanely good vehicle either. It does have a very good gun. That is for sure. You have 110 alpha, you have 132 standard pen, and 185 premium pen, which means that you can pen pretty much anyone you meet. Bearing in mind, you could meet +2, so if you do meet some tier 7s, you're probably going to need to dip into that 185, because yeah, it's not fun being a tier 5 and you meet tier 7. But as I said, this tank is just your standard medium tank. It's actually a very good tank to learn medium tanks in, but you're going for a heavy tank. So you see, this is always the problem that I have. If this was a medium tank line and it was going down the line to the TVP, I'd probably rate this higher, because you start to learn the process of it. You start to learn how to play medium tanks and get into that flow of the medium tank. Whereas this line teaches you nothing until you grind up to tier 7 for that style of play that you're going to be used to at tier 10. I mean, if you're rating this tank for how good it is, just on its own, I'd say it's like a 5 out of 10. It's not great, it's not terrible, it's just good in the middle. But if you're rating this tank and you want to know how good it is, you know, in like the line that going up to the VZ55, it's like a 1 out of 10. It's awful because it teaches you nothing about the tank that you're going to get to. But no, the tank on its own, it's about a 5 out of 10. The Tier 6 Skoda T25 is a little bit of a different story. Even though that it is still a medium tank and it doesn't teach you anything, the tank itself is very fun and it has character with its gun. Because by default, you get the gun that was on the previous tank. You have the 110 Alpha, 132 Standard Pen, and 185 Premium Pen. However, you can then upgrade and get the autoloader version of this gun, and it's just fun. 3 shells in a magazine, 1.3 second intro clip, 12 seconds to complete the reload. It is lovely to play with. Apart from that, the tank is pretty much exactly the same. I mean, is it slightly faster? Actually, I don't even know if it's slightly faster. It's actually slightly slower by the looks of things. Fair enough, we don't have the engine, but okay, it's slightly slower than the previous tank, but you do gain that autoloader. I would say that if you're going to give the previous tank a 5 out of 10, this is like a 6 out of 10. Maybe 7, depending on how you play it. It can be a very, very fun tank for some people to play. Does it teach you anything about the VZ55? No. However, you then move on to the VZ44-1, which is the Tier 7. And this thing is the heavy tank. You start to now play the heavy tanks in this line. And it's taken you all the way up to Tier 7 to get there. And for some people, this is just a big no-no. If you, for example, just want to play one line and you think to yourself, maybe you have, you know, a full-time job, you come home and you just think, I just want to play a line where I can just play heavy tanks and get a decent tank at the end of it, and it'll just be a good enough experience. It doesn't have to be insanely fun because you're going to have to grind regardless of what you do in this game, but I want a tank line where I can just play some heavy tanks and then progress. And if that's you, like, this line is useless because you don't play the heavy tank until Tier 7, which means that it's then a completely different style of play once you then get to Tier 7. And if you're new to the game, changing that playstyle all of a sudden at Tier 7 will be very detrimental to, well, I mean, your team, because you won't have a clue what you're doing, and also yourself and your gameplay because, again, you don't have a clue what you're doing. You're going to have to relearn everything as you go, and then follow your other heavy tanks around the map, and then just try and do as best as you can. However, is this tank any good? Well, obviously, this is a fair amount slower than the previous tank. You do have a decent turret armor, especially if you upgrade the turret as well. You get 200 on the front. Yes, you do have a slight cupola, but honestly, it's not too bad. It looks bigger than it is, okay? At least that's what I tell everyone. But when you go and use all your gun depression, which you get -8, you can usually hide this at least okay. Because if you look at this and you're all the way fully gun depression over a ridgeline, yes, they can still hit it, but it's not a massive target if you're on a ridgeline. If you're out in the open or above it, then yes, it's bloody massive. Look at it. But if you're on a ridgeline, which you should be in this type of tank, you should be okay. As you can see, 30 km/h top speed, 14 power to weight, which is not great. You do get decent enough hit points at Tier 7, which is 1,400. And you get a lovely alpha damage boost of 320 with 206 standard pen. I wouldn't recommend you use any of the other guns because they are just not worth it. If we have a look at the other guns, you have this, which is the main one, and then we have the 100mm gun, which is going to be, yes, a little bit nicer to play with. It has more DPM, it has better dispersion. However, the penetration isn't good unless you spam heat. Because if you then spam heat, you have slightly more pen than you do with this gun, the 105. But for most people, I would say the 105 is the one to get and play with. I would say that this tank is 7 out of 10. It's not bad. It's not a T29, but it's not bad. As long as you can work to hide that cupola, you can make this tank work. You'll also notice that this tank does not have the double shot. This is because you don't get this until the next tank at tier 8, which it used to be that doesn't really teach you the way of the tank. But when we move to tier 8, you'll see why this really doesn't matter anymore. The TNH 105/1000 is the tier 8 vehicle in this line, and the first one that gets the double shot autoloader. And you may think to yourself, finally, here we go. I can now use it and I can start farming people. Unfortunately, the double shot autoloaders in this entire line are now useless. You are actually much, much better off by just using the single shot gun and not touching the autoloader at all. As you can see, the autoloader gun, it has 320 alpha, 224 standard pen, and 252 premium pen. It has 0.44 dispersion, but 1400 DPM. Oh. If we go and have a look at this tank in game, you will see that it has very, very good top speed, very, very good power to weight. In fact, this is very characteristic of this entire line. You start to learn that from tier 8 to tier 10, they are fast, have good mobility, can get into locations, have decent turrets, and can farm on the ridgeline. The tier 7 doesn't really teach you this, but it has the rest of it apart from the speed. But the tier 8 is the one that really starts to teach you this. And as you can see though, with the autoloader, the double shot autoloader, you have 2 shots in the magazine, 22 seconds to reload, and 2.5 intra-clip reload. Which means that you shoot once, you load 2.5 seconds, you then shoot again. And then you reload for 22 seconds. And then you rinse and repeat the whole thing. You will only get 100 more hit points than the previous tier, which is not really that much in the grand scheme of things, considering that, a Tiger 2 gets 1.7k hit points or something like that. So you're 200 hit points down from that, and the Tiger 2 is a better tank. But the aim time is also tragic on this vehicle. With the autoloader, that is very important to add. Because if you don't use the autoloader, as you can see, 1500 DPM with the autoloader, and if we don't use it, it's just such a better tank. You have exactly the same pen, exactly the same damage, loads more DPM, much, much better dispersion at 100 meters, and a much better aiming time. Everything about the tank is just better. And it begs the question, what is the point of the autoloader on this tank? Because it is just outright useless in comparison to the standard gun. However, there is one thing to note, is that if you are using the single shotgun, you will not be able to mount a rammer. This is because instead of coding in that you can put a rammer on it, they just made it so that they basically gave it a rammer by default in comparison to the other tanks. Now, I don't know whether or not that's just lazy coding. It probably is, because they couldn't be bothered to just code in that you could put a rammer on it and then, not put a rammer on this one. Either way, it doesn't actually matter. But you won't be able to mount a rammer on the single shot gun. You will only be able to mount vents if you actually want to boost that DPM up. And the exact thing is the same for all of these other tanks. If you mount the single shotgun, you will not be able to mount a rammer. So what would I rate the TNH? If you're going to be using the autoloader gun, that's like a 2 or a 3 out of 10. Okay, it's an awful experience. If you're going to be using the single shot fully upgraded gun, I would say that this is about maybe a 7 out of 10. The reason being is that it's not a Tiger 2, which is like an 8 or a 9 out of 10. And although that, yes, the tank does have a decent enough gun, it's not insanely good. It's not a Tiger 2's gun. So that's why I would say that it's about a 7 out of 10. The armor is okay. It's not insanely good. The turret-wise is good. I will say, like, you get 230 at the front on the turret cheeks. However, once you see premium ammo, you're going to go and just die to it. But it's okay overall. So yeah, I reckon around about a 7 out of 10 for this. Moving up to tier 9, and this is where it used to be one of the best tier 9s in the game, because this was very, very strong at tier 9. And then it got nerfed. Because you see, you have the exact same issue as you do with the previous tank, where you have an autoloader on this tank, which is completely and utterly useless. You have no DPM. You have no real dispersion. That is pretty bad dispersion. Now we're up to tier 9. And god-awful aiming time. You still go fast enough. You still have good power to weight. You have much better hit points, it must be said, than the previous tank. 1.9 is good. That's about right for a tier 9 heavy of this type of style. And the turret armor, although it says 300 here, you see these two little, I don't really know what these are, viewports? They can actually be penned if you are slightly higher than it, or even on flat ground. If you go to the right of it, if you go to the left of it, you'll be able to actually pen these very, very easily, as I found out by just playing this vehicle. It was an awful experience when you're on flat ground and then someone just shoots that and then you get penned there. So this tank really does beg that you just stay on a ridgeline for the whole time, because once you are on a ridgeline and you're using all of your -7 degrees of gun depression, you will then keep these protected. And the only way that they can really pen you is in the cupola. But as you can see, the gun is god-awful. And then once you go and downgrade the gun to the single shot one, you then have much more DPM, you have much better, well, not much better aim time to be fair, but you get much better dispersion and just a general better experience playing the tank. I mean, think of it this way. You have a 12-second gun loading time on this. And then you have a 30-second gun loading time on the other one, the autoloader one. Which means that you could have fired 2 shots in the time that that other tank is reloading, and then you're ready for your 3rd shot nearly at the same time that they're prepared to then fire their other 2 shots. When you compare it like that, there's just no point of using the double shotgun. And yes, I do understand that there are lots of situations where the double shot will be better. However, with the DPM it has, there are very few situations where I personally would rather have the double shot than the single shot. And it's just sad, really, because the double shot is now just a gimmick. When they nerfed it so much that it's just not worth using. So although that the tier 9 didn't get nerfed as hard as the VZ55 with the nerfs, it still got nerfed to the point where the double shot isn't worth it. So what do I rate this tank? Honestly, pre-nerf it would have been like a 9 out of 10 or something. But now it's probably about a 7. It's just a 7. It's just an okay tank. It's just nothing exceptional, which is what this entire line has just been so far. Where it's just not really, it's not got character behind it. Because if you're not going to use a double shot, this line's basically irrelevant. It's just a boring standard heavy tank, which doesn't really get much pen. You know, you have 252 pen and 294 premium pen. Yes, you have 440 alpha, but that's not really exceptional pen. Think about it. You could play an E75, which has 311 APCR pen. And that's by no means insanely good, but it's much, much better than this. So yeah, about a 7 out of 10 for the tier 9. It used to be like an 8 or a 9, but now it's definitely been knocked down a bit. And then you come to the VZ55, which is almost unplayable with the double shotgun, because the aim time has just become horrific. If you thought that the aim time on the tier 9 was bad at 2.9 seconds, this then gets even worse at 3 seconds. And you need to remember one very important factor about this. It is 2.5 seconds in between each shell, which means that it will never be fully aimed after you fire, unless you put a hell of a lot of equipment on this tank and field mods and everything else to make it go and make sure that it's within that 2.5 seconds. Which then just, what's the point of it? So here's the thing with the VZ55. If you use the single shotgun, you get better soft stats, better aim time, better everything, to be honest with you. But yes, you don't get the intraclip 2.5 seconds mega mega fast damage output of like 1000. However, you get just much better DPM. I mean, just look at this DPM difference. 3000 compared to 2400. And that's using the exact same equipment and setup. You have 0.3 dispersion versus 0.32. You have 2.2 seconds aim time for the standard single shotgun. And then you have 2.8 for the double shot, which just makes it unplayable. It's actually horrible to play with that much aim time on a gun that requires it to be quite low for the intro clip. And it actually gets even worse than this, because if you go ahead and configure this and look at the field mods, there is actually a field mod that if you are using the double shot, you should 100% pick this field mod, because even though it slightly makes your tank worse in other areas, it makes the gun actually playable. And that is this field mod for number 7. By default, near enough everyone will pick top forward speed 4 kilometers an hour. If you pick the right hand one though, your aim time then goes down to 2.6, but your then top speed goes down to 51 from obviously 59. However, if you do this, and then you have this dispersion, which is still not very good, but then obviously if you use stab as well, it's then a little bit more manageable. It goes down to 2.7, which is still not great, but it's okay. You could then also go ahead and replace the stab for experimental fire control system, and then you get it down to 2.47. But the thing is, you shouldn't have to do all of this just to make the tank somewhat playable. I think it's killed the double shotgun so much that there's no point of playing it if you're trying to go for marks of excellence or just trying to have fun in the game, to be honest, because it's a horrible experience. And I have tried loads of different things to get that double shotgun to work. I've tried bond vents with the improved turbo like this, and then also the experimental fire control system, and it's just sometimes the gun just goes nope and just does whatever it wants. Don't get me wrong, the gun will sometimes say nope and does whatever it wants with the single shotgun. However, you load back in within about 9 seconds, so it's not, you don't feel as punished. When you hit a 1 out of 2 shot with the double shot, it feels so much worse than missing 1 shot with a single shot. Because think about it, you're basically then having 490 alpha for a 20 something second reload. And that just brings me to, honestly, like almost the conclusion for this line. What is the point of grinding it? And again, I want to come back to the person that is the average player who just comes home from work, school, whatever, and then goes, okay, I want to grind a line. They haven't got other tanks, right? Maybe they've got a medium tank line or something and they want to grind a heavy tank. There is zero reason for you to grind a VZ55 line. The 277 line does, and the 5A line does everything this line does, but better. And I think after the nerfs, all of the tanks in this line, from the tier 8 and onwards, the tier 8 was never really that good for the double shot, but more so the tier 9 and tier 10, they've lost any sense of character that they had with the double shot, because the single shot is now just better and you should be using the single shot. So you now join me in the budget 277 on Live Oaks, and their EBR is already dead. As you can see, we are using the small gun. We are using HP, turbo, experimental turbo that is, and the experimental fire control system. The reason for this is that I have been trying recently so hard to make this tank work with the double shot, because I want it to. As I said, the tank has no character, it has no... It's just a very boring generic tank with the single shot. Whereas then if you use the double shot, it has something different to it from other tanks. As the artillery goes underneath my tank. I perfectly dodged that. That was all me. Definitely not RNG at all. But I wanted the tank to have something, right? It's unique if it has the double shot tank, the double shot gun on it. Whereas it's just nothing without it. And I tried, and I tried, and I tried, and the single shot's just flat out better than it. That's just the outcome of it. On every single tank, it's just not worth using the double shot. Especially on tier 10. As I said, the tier 9, you know, it's a little bit, maybe you could get away with it. We love having good soft stats for the gun dispersion values. It does mean that you can get away without stab. Even though that on this, yes, we are using slightly stab. It's got 10% worth of stab, but... Oh, shot. Well aimed. We would actually be in a lot of trouble if that had penned again, because he could have blown me up. But yes, even though that we are using somewhat stab here, it's not like it's going to make a massive difference. It's only around about 11%, I think. And so you can easily go without stab on this tank. I mean, I have been playing it without stab since then. I took it off. I think this was one of my last games that I actually used the experimental one. I purely only had it on because I just switched back to the single shot and I hadn't changed the equipment. But you can go with vents and then you get that reload time reduction, and it's just really, really nice. You are then more in line with tanks like the 277 and 5A with DPM, but still not as good as them. That's the thing. That's the big thing about this vehicle. You're just not as good as the 5A and the 277. But having a little look at this game, we are winning 7-4, and it looks very, very good until you look at our base. And it's then not looking so good. So we put maybe one into the C50, don't quite connect it. Time to go back to base and see if we can then deal with anybody that is over there. Because the E50 might have been able to snipe across, but we're not actually in that much of a good situation. We have the Gonkiewicz and the TNH that are somewhat hold down, but every single time that they peek, they'll then just get shot at. So it's going to be very hard for them to kind of deal with this situation, especially if there are people in the zero line that will then just shoot across. So the M6Y is in the cap. Yeah, I don't really know why you would start capping in this situation, because you're opening yourself up way too much. But we're now hold down. We can now start to deal with these. The only thing that we really need to worry about is anybody that may be on the zero line at the very back, like that 113 that's just shot us from those bushes, and also anybody that is within the left-hand side at the A9 region. Because if they're at A9 and they can just about see us, they'll be able to shoot us, and it can be a problem. But again, this is very, very simple gameplay. We just come back, we deal with what's there, and then we can move on with our lives. Unfortunately, trying to pen this IS-7 is a little bit of a struggle, because he's just behind the wreckage of, what is that? 752. So he's a little bit of a problem, but we cleared it up. So it's not too much of a problem in the end. We were lucky that we had won the other side. If we hadn't have won the other side, then we would have maybe been in quite a bit of danger. But yeah, that's a VZ55. You can. The good thing about this game is that every single tank in the line is going to pretty much play like this. It will play exactly like this. You have roughly the same speed. You have roughly the same reload time-ish. It goes down, obviously, as you go up the line. And you have, for tier, roughly the same alpha. What I mean by that is that you have 490 at tier 10 and then 440, so it kind of balances it out as you go down the tiers. The tank is not inherently useless, but it is kind of useless when you compare it to the 277 and the 5A. So for that game, we have 5,400 damage, only a tiny amount of resistance, basically nothing. But yeah, overall, I mean, it was just a nice cleanup job. Like, you didn't really have anything that we had to really work for, right? You got some lucky shots here and there. We went back when we needed to. We just played correctly and got the job done. And I mean, as I said, it shows you everything that you need to know about this tank. Sometimes the tank is derpy. Sometimes the tank is fine. I mean, we lost a lot of credits because I was firing full goal, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So the big question, though, is this line and tank worth the grind? No. I don't think it is. I don't think it's worth your time to grind it. If you are someone that plays this game every single day, you're going to grind this tank eventually anyway, so it doesn't matter to you. But if you're someone that doesn't have the time or the effort to go down and grind it, there are better tanks. This is an inferior line to other lines that are in the game. There are better heavy tanks than this in the game. And since the nerfs, you shouldn't be using the double shot because it is not good. To put this into perspective, let's take a look at the 277 line. You have a KV1, a KV1S, an IS, an IS3, a T10, and then the 277. Why on earth would you ever grind the VZ55 line when you could start to learn how to play from tier 5 rather than tier 7, and you don't have any gimmicky double shot mechanics? These are just your simple, generic, but good heavy tanks. A tank can be generic, but the VZ55 is generic and boring. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you all in the next one.